Good evening, and welcome to our Conversations with Culture Shifters, featuring our very special guest, Emmanuel Acho. Emmanuel is a Fox Sports analyst and host producer of Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, as well as the author of the book by the same name, which is a New York Times bestseller. I'm Reggie Van Lee, Chief Transformation Officer at the Carlyle Group and Advisory Board member at Culture Shift Labs. Conversations with Culture Shifters is brought to you by Culture Shift Labs, a diversity and innovation consultancy that launched in 2006. This new monthly series, which kicked off in December with Percy Miller, aka Master P, will be talking to leaders and luminaries, icons and influencers, artists and activists, and other examples of excellence in our community. It's amazing to see that almost 3,000 leaders registered to hear from Emmanuel and his incredible insights. We have many CEOs joining us tonight as well. In the past, we would hold these conversations during Culture Shift weekends, but because of 2020, we've decided to open these up to a broader audience to tackle racial equity head on, while still emphasizing connection to information and opportunities, and most importantly, to each other. Please be sure to use the chat feature to meet new people. We know that thoughtful insight paired with connections and collaborations lead to an improved business and society. That's what Emmanuel hopes to inspire tonight too. This evening's important and timely conversation about racism, allyship, and more will be led by Vanessa Colella, Chief Innovation Officer at Citi, Head of Citi Ventures, and Head of Citi Productivity. Over to you, Vanessa, to get us started.
Thank you so much, Reggie, and thanks to Culture Shifters. I'm really excited to be here this evening. I'm apologizing in advance for our puppy who's snoring in the background. I assure you that no one else will be snoring for this next period of time. We're super excited to welcome Emmanuel Acho. I'm really such a pleasure to be able to talk to you for a little while and learn from you. So welcome, Emmanuel. Oh. Maybe we don't have him. The puppy's still here snoring. I'm sure he'll be back in just a minute. I know, as we get there he is. Welcome, Emmanuel. Nice to see you.
Technology issues, but Vanessa, so good to see you as well.
Likewise. Thank you so much for joining us. I have so many questions. If it's okay with you, I'm just going to dive right in.
Let's do it, please. Can you hear me great? I'm taking out these stubborn AirPods of mine.
Yep, you're all good.
Lovely.
So listen, former NFL linebacker, Fox Sports analyst, now best-selling author, and really like the creator and the brains and the heart behind Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. What was the inspiration? What caused you to start this movement?
Great question. Vanessa, I get asked, Emmanuel, what was the inspiration behind Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man? And I pivot. Because it wasn't created out of inspiration, Vanessa, it was actually created out of devastation. See, after the murder of George Floyd in late May of 2020, so many people like myself were devastated. I didn't know if I should cry. I didn't know if I should scream. I was walking aimlessly around my house in Austin, Texas, trying to figure out, Vanessa, what do I do? What do I do? I have to figure out some sort of solution. Then I remembered, wait a second, Emmanuel, you are a skilled communicator. You grew up in a culture, speaking of culture, you grew up in a culture of white people. But then you played in the NFL and you played in college, immersed in Black culture. Vanessa, we all must realize there's a difference between color and culture. See, you can be Black and white cultured. You can be white and Black cultured, although it's a lot more rare. So what is the difference? What's the disconnect in our country? And I realize there's a communication barrier because there's a cultural barrier. And that is why Uncomfortable Conversations with the Black Man started.
Now, you've had a bunch of conversations. I've watched a lot of them, and I've learned a lot already. If you had to pick kind of a few of the most uncomfortable moments, could you give our audience a highlight or two, and maybe what that brought out to you that perhaps you weren't expecting either?
The two highlight, well, the question is a little oxymoronic, right? Because the most uncomfortable wouldn't be the highlight, but I'll answer the most uncomfortable. I was talking to white parents who had adopted two biological They had adopted 2 black children from Haiti, one biological white son, and a biracial adoption. So 4 kids in total, white parents, Jamie and Aaron, biological son, and then 2 black children, 1 mixed race child. I asked the black daughter, 12 years old, her name was Story. I said, Story, do you wish your parents raising you were black or looked more like you? Now, mind you, I asked this 12-year-old beautiful black girl this question as she sat to my left and her white mother sat to my right. So it was bound to be waterworks either way. Vanessa, if she says, yes, I wish my mom raising me was black, well, now her mother, white mother, feels inadequate. If she says, no, I like her just how she is, the mother just feels completely filled and cries. And so I asked her, do you wish your mother raising you were black or looked more like you? And she said, she thought about it. She said, ooh. She said, no, I just like that she loves me for me. Tears start falling down the eyes of the mother, Jamie Ivey. If you haven't seen that episode, it's on my YouTube, my Instagram, all that. But that was uncomfortable. The other most uncomfortable question for me, it was when I was sitting with Oprah, and it was actually an Oprah conversation. Uncomfortable Conversations and the Oprah Conversation on Apple TV. They merged for an episode, for Oprah's inaugural episode of the Oprah Conversation. And I was asked there were 10 different guests, and each one would pop up on an iPad and they would chime in and ask a question. But one question came from someone who wanted to remain anonymous. Vanessa, if you know anything about life, if someone wants to remain anonymous or wants to mask behind anonymity, something's coming. So the person who wanted to remain anonymous, they say, Emmanuel, the Holocaust was both more recent and more lethal than slavery, but Jewish people have been able to recover. Why can't black people recover? 1, I was offended. 2, the level of ignorance. 3, the combination of ignorance and offense. But then I said, okay, I paused because I said, I'm glad you asked. Because Vanessa, she was walking around, this woman was walking around with this concept in her head, looking at black people, thinking in her head or in her heart, I mean, Jewish people have recovered. I don't get why y'all can't recover. So as offensive and ignorant as that question was, I was so glad it was asked. Because if she's thinking it, surely some other white people might be thinking it. And that's the problem in our society. People walk around with these ignorant beliefs, these ignorant thoughts, and because they never bring them up in conversation, that ignorance continues to fester. And it festers until it boils over into private conversations, because misery loves company, but so does ignorance. And so it festers into private conversations when this ignorance continues to develop and manifest itself. So those were the 2 most uncomfortable moments over the show's short history.
Thank you for that. I mean, there's so much learning in all of this. One thing that you've said in a couple of different settings that I've seen that I'm really curious about, especially since you and I aren't even together, we don't get a chance to meet in the green room beforehand because everybody's separate right now. You said a couple times, proximity breeds care, while distance breeds fear. And just thinking of that last example that you talked about, can you talk a little bit about, how should people be thinking about proximity in this moment in 21? We all understand that we're probably going to be distant for longer than any of us had hoped, and so we're busy strengthening a lot of our close connections, right, with family and close friends. But a lot of those more distant connections that we all know are so important, it's a little bit harder to strengthen. You can't call up a casual acquaintance and say, hey, you want to Zoom on Thursday night to sort of catch up. So how do you think about proximity in both the time that we're in from the pandemic perspective and also this really important moment that we're in terms of trying to move forward from a racial equity perspective?
It's a great question. I would say this, we can't be lazy with our interpretations of life and of words. You can be physically proximal to someone, but you also can be emotionally or spiritually, right? When I say proximity breeds care and distance breeds fear, I'm not just talking about physical. Think about this. If you're in a relationship with someone and you don't hear from your significant other for a while, you start to worry. Are they mad at me? Are they okay? Are they safe? I don't know. Sometimes all it takes is a little text message to let you know they're okay. You didn't need to see them. You just needed to hear from them. So when I say proximity breeds care, distance breeds fear, it's not as though white people and black people need to go, holding hands, skipping through fields littered in daisies. No, but like, let me call you and check in on you. Let me FaceTime you and talk to you. Within my company, let me ask my boss, or if I am the boss, you know what? Let's have a Zoom with the black colleagues, the white colleagues, and let's give the black colleagues the floor to speak. Because contrary to common belief, more often than not, black colleagues will feel lesser than just because that's the way in which businesses have interpreted their value. So when I say proximity breeds care, distance breeds fear, it's not just, okay, he's talking about being with somebody. A part of that is the case. Again, this is what I asked the entire Petaluma Police Department when I sat with them 2 months ago. When was the last time you had dinner with a black person? When was the last time you sat down and invited a black person to your house? Now, what's so funny, Vanessa, so many people retort, well, when's the last time a black person invited me to their house? Like, okay, you're missing the point, right? Like when was the last time you sat down and had dinner with somebody who didn't look like you? And I think that's what we have to do a better job of doing is, when's the last time I initiated a conversation? Thankfully, in my life, I've orchestrated it as such where I'm always with different groups of people. I'm with hood black people. I'm with private school preppy black people like myself. I'm with country white people. I'm with inner city white people. I'm with the richest of white people. I'm with impoverished white people. That's just how I've orchestrated my life. I like varieties because you get different levels of knowledge, and not even book knowledge, but life knowledge from different people and experiences.
That's great insight. I think, you mentioned at the beginning of that response, Emmanuel, colleagues. And I want to turn, if we can, for a moment to how should we think about some of these issues at work? I'll tell you from my experience, after the tragedy with George Floyd, I reached out to all the Black individuals on my team. And then I realized I'd never done that before. It's not like that was the first tragedy. And never before had I thought, gee, I should really pick up the phone and I should call everybody. So how do you think about bringing something that's really in so many ways personal and emotional, as you said in one of your earlier responses, into the workplace with colleagues? What are some guidelines you can give us to navigate to be better?
Well, one, to be better, you have to be present, right? Like, it's funny in life, it's almost as though we think if we just ignore it, it'll go away. Like we do that with illnesses sometimes. Like, yeah, don't worry about this little old cough. Next thing you know, you got walking pneumonia. It's like, wait a second, can we just address it before it continues to build? So how can we be better? We can be present. Vanessa, after George Floyd was murdered, one thing stands out to me. I got a call from 3 men, Brandon, Russell, and Trent, 3 white men, friends of mine. And they called and all they said was, hey, I want you to know I'm here for you. If you want to yell, if you want to cry, if you want to vent, if you want to talk, whatever it is, I'm here. That wasn't riveting. That wasn't life-changing. But it was just, hey, I'm present. I'm available. I'm like, whatever you need, talk to me. That's the first step. The second step is, please do a level of research in coming to the conversation so you can avoid the landmines. Now, let me start. Do the level of understanding so you don't ask a question as offensive of, why can't Black people get over slavery? If you had any idea of the wake left from slavery, you would understand the answer to that question. If you had any idea that historically 2 ways to acquire wealth in America are through property and education, not my opinion, that's a fact. Property, due to redlining after the war, Black people were thrown into the lowest socioeconomic status areas and couldn't get loans from the banks. So that ruined property for Black people. Well, that's done. Okay, there's still education. Black people, you still have education. Problem, 50% of public school education, roughly speaking, is funded by property and property taxes. So if Black people were thrown into poor neighborhoods only because they were Black, and Black people's education is now porous because the opportunity presented to them is funded by those poor neighborhoods that way they were thrown into, again, only because they were Black, then maybe that's why Black people aren't as wealthy as white people. What does that stem from? Slavery, Jim Crow, segregation. It's all interwoven. These are not my opinions. These are not my feelings. These aren't, oh, this is just another Black person complaining. No, these are just facts. So what can you do within your companies? Educate yourself to have a level of understanding. So when you come to your colleagues, you're not coming to them incidentally offensively.
Yeah, I think that's a phrase we should all think about. Incidentally offensively. How do we make sure that we aren't accidentally doing things that are wrong? And I think that point of what do you do to educate yourself in advance?
Correct. Because let's pause here, because this is actually the bigger of issues in America, which nobody talks about. It's not that people in America are still like overtly racist, just running around saying the N-word, owning slaves. That's not really what we're dealing with. But if I can break this down for y'all, in our judicial system, we have levels of murder. First degree murder, premeditated. Second degree murder, a crime of passion. Third degree murder, or not third degree murder, but you move down the rungs, involuntary manslaughter. Vanessa, not intentional, but it still leads to death. We have the same thing. We have degrees of racism. See, first degree racism, saying the N-word, intentionally, offensively owning slaves. Second degree racism, George Floyd, a crime of passion, where George Floyd's Blackness played a part. But we have incidental, we have involuntary racism. What is that, Vanessa? Emmanuel, you are so educated for a Black man. Oh my gosh, Emmanuel, has anybody ever told you how intelligent you sound for being Black? Emmanuel, you're like an Oreo, Black on the outside, white on the inside. Emmanuel, you don't even dress like you're Black. Emmanuel, you're not like those other Black guys. Wow, Emmanuel, you present yourself so well for being Black. All things that I've heard, and not just me, all my Black colleagues, all my Black peers, involuntary racism. Because when you say that, you're implying, because I sound smart, I can't be Black. That's what you mean when you say you're like an Oreo, Black on the outside, white on the inside. So what is it to be white? To be white is to be intelligent. To be white is to talk proper. What is it then to be Black? To be unintelligent. What are the involuntary racist ideologies that we're perpetuating?
What have you seen, Emmanuel? Either, like you said before, you're in so many different settings and many different corporate settings. Are there any best practices from a workplace perspective, any kind of workplace, that you've seen that really advance the dialogue and therefore advance that proximity that you talked about before?
Not yet, no. They're coming. The advice I give is it's very simple, because these things aren't difficult. They are just uncomfortable. If I was in the workplace, what I would do is simple. I would say twice a month, I would let the minority colleagues have the floor for the majority colleague. Now, the minority might be women. The minority might be Black. If some companies, the minority might be white. Minority might be Hispanic. Minority might be a combination of Black and brown women and men. But I would say, okay, you know what? I don't know that I don't know. The only way I can know is if you tell me. So, hey, minority groups, you have the floor. How is your experience different, in your opinion, from everyone else's? Because you're going to hear things you never heard of. Vanessa, I used to go to a small group when I lived in Austin, Texas. The small group was predominantly white, 13 white people, and there was me. And I would walk in there and I would talk like I usually talk, but this is a whole nother conversation. But Black people typically code switch. So like when I talk to my Black people, I talk way different than how I'm talking right now. But I would talk how I usually talk. And the white people in the small group would make fun of me because I'm using a vernacular that's unfamiliar to them. So now I'm like, you know what? I don't really feel like being here. Now, I finally brought this to their attention after I left, but I think companies and corporations need to do a better job of saying, wait, we don't even know what we don't know. Because the white people in the small group be like, he just said this, he just said that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just being me. Like, why are you making me feel like an outcast for being me? So it's very simple. Give the minority the floor so you can educate yourself, so you all can function better as a company.
Yeah. And I think, one thing that we've certainly tried to do at Citi is let's make sure that everyone can bring themselves to work, right? Why should you have to come to work with some veneer of somebody else? You should be able to bring your whole self to work.
That sounds good. But like, Talk is cheap, right? Like, again, I don't know the agenda that you have and all the conversations we have to get to, but when you bring up a good point, let's address a good point in the time we have. Because I sound, Vanessa, put that on a Hallmark card, right? Like, bring your whole self to work. Here's a problem. Here's why Black people do what's called code switching. And what code switching is, well, when I'm talking to Vanessa, yes, it's just so lovely to meet you. It's just so lovely to see you, Vanessa. The smile on your face, it's so radiant. But then when I'm talking to my homeboys, I might talk like this, because that's my dude. And so the issue at hand is Black people can't often bring themselves to work because Blackness has been deemed as threatening to white culture. See, if you're Black like myself, you can't exist in America and avoid white spaces because America is run by white people and predominantly white by percentages. However, if you're white, you can exist in America and avoid Black spaces very easily. In Los Angeles right now, I live in Beverly Hills only because it's close to where I work. I rarely see Black people in my neighborhood. Now, when I go to work, I see Black people, but I rarely see them. So it's hard for Black people to bring themselves fully because white people aren't familiar with Blackness. And so white people view Blackness, distance breeds fear. White people view Blackness as threatening or fearful or foreign. So like an individual might cover up their tattoos when they go to work, Black people cover up their Black culture at work because white people who aren't exposed to Black culture don't know how to handle said culture. So while you say that, and many people listening want to encourage that, we just have to do a better job of understanding what it is we are encouraging and how can we best truly live out what we're saying.
That makes sense. As you think about some of the lessons that you talk about, Emmanuel, and the notion of bringing this into the workplace. I mean, you talked before about these aren't your opinions, right? There's been plenty of work on diverse teams drive better results. We understand that if you've got management in a company that has many different perspectives, different backgrounds, there will be better results. But still, we are all falling short. So how do we get past the intellectual understanding that diversity is important and into we just make it a part of how we behave, how we do business, how we make decisions?
Okay, this is packed. I'm going to unpack this so everyone track with me. There is a difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge. It's one thing to know something. It's another thing to feel something. It's number one. Number two, we also have to understand that the world we live in is not a meritocracy. You don't achieve exactly what you work for in business. Oftentimes, business, the advancements of a business are based upon nepotism. You hire those who look like you, and cronyism. You hire your friends. So if we understand that, then that's part of the fix. Here's the other point you have to understand is my coach would always tell me, Vanessa, Acho, don't be like water. Water takes the easiest route. Because if you were to pour water on the ground, it would just navigate the path of least resistance. That's what so many corporate leaders do. They navigate the hiring path of least resistance. What do I mean? Practical example. Vanessa, you and I walk into a restaurant. We'll walk into Cheesecake Factory, moderately nice, but still affordable. You and I walk into a restaurant, and as we walk in, I'm like, Vanessa, I lost my keys. They must have fell out of my pocket. Can we go look for them? You say, yes, Emmanuel, I'll accompany you. Sure. We walk out the restaurant and I turn right and I start looking under the nearest light pole for my keys. You look at me and you say, well, Emmanuel, we didn't even park that way. We parked left. I'd respond, I know, but this is where the light is. See, because so many companies, that's what they do. And then you're nodding your head, so I assume you've heard this. This is what they do. They look at the place which is easiest to garner information as opposed to looking for the place where they want to garner information. So there are historically Black colleges and universities if you want to become more diverse. There are a large pool of capable, intelligent Black people. But are you looking there? Now, the slight pushback I'll give, because so many people are already thinking, well, if we go out of our way to hire Black, isn't that reverse racism? Shouldn't we hire the best candidate? Understand, historically in our country, we've never just hired the best candidate, because we've often hired the white candidate. The white candidate may be the best candidate, but we've never even cross-checked. So before you go disputing, well, if I go out of my way to an HBCU, that's not fair to the white person. Understand what this country has been predicated upon. Okay, that's all.
No, that's incredibly helpful. I feel like we could talk all evening. I do want to give Reggie Van Lee a chance to come back in. I know he had a couple of questions for you and wants to make a few closing remarks. So thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to meet you. I hope one day we'll be able to meet in person. But in the meantime, you got a lot of fans from afar, and we're all so grateful for what we're learning from these conversations, and just your ability to make us think differently. So thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Wow. Well, Emmanuel, thank you. First, being an engineer, you gave me a bunch of math lessons. First, culture does not equal color.
Yeah.
Second, love is more important than color. Third, uncomfortable doesn't necessarily equal difficult. And fourth, head knowledge does not necessarily equal heart knowledge. So thank you for those math lessons. That was amazing for me. A couple of things you said that I'll just make note of. This notion of undiscussed ignorance festers. And so you have to have the conversation. Otherwise, that ignorance will fester. That proximity isn't just about physicality, that you can create proximity without being physically connected to somebody. And that to be better requires that you be present. To be better, you have to be present. And the notion of don't be incidentally offensive. And then lastly, this notion of don't be naive. This bring your whole self to work sounds cute, but suggests in some cases a sense of naivete that doesn't make sense. So those were amazing insights. I really thank you so much for that.
Honestly, Reggie, I forgot that I shared all that. When you said it made it sound so much better coming from you. I feel like that it sounded coming from me. So
I don't know. There's an advantage to summarizing good things other people say, right? So thank you. I know our time is short. So in closing, we all like to be inspired and educated, but it's the action of what you do that makes changes. Action is what we need right now. We welcome you via the chat to share with us what actions you're going to take from what you have just heard. Please be on the lookout for our next Conversations with Culture Shifters on LinkedIn Live, February 11th, with Rick Willard and his special guest to be announced soon. On behalf of Culture Shift Labs, we thank you for joining our Conversation with Culture Shifters. Emmanuel Acho, you're amazing. And I guess my last thing is, what infinite wisdom do you want to share with us as we close, Emmanuel?
Man, that's a phenomenal question. I'll keep it tight. Oprah asked me, she said, Emmanuel, what's the greatest? Oh, it's Oprah's birthday, by the way, today. So happy birthday, Oprah.
Yeah.
Oprah asked me, she said, Emmanuel, what is the greatest lesson you've learned in all this? I've never been asked that question before. I said this, and then this is my parting wisdom, is that you individually have the ability to change the world. So many people say that superfluously, but I genuinely mean that. When I played dominoes as a kid, I would line up 100 dominoes, not the actual game of counting numbers dominoes, but just stacking dominoes and knocking them over. And Reggie, I would line up 100 dominoes and I would push the first one and I would watch the dominoes continue to topple over. But the first domino never knew it was going to knock over the 100th. It only had the objective of knocking over the next one. So anybody watching this, don't plan on knocking over the 100th heart. Don't plan on changing the 100th mind. Just change the mind and the heart of the person nearest to you and watch the domino effect.
There you have it. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.